So, addressing the, I guess, top-down classification, layering, hierarchical access to data, and how my upper Fermi filter product stack and knowledge base seems to uh, be Earth as seen from space above necessarily all classified clearance by default assumption in scope of knowledge, all of it together considered. There's no precedent for it from a single vector, and the persona myself has been spoken for necessarily as being wholeheartedly benevolent at all vectors. In motion and curation for Earth, this of course is the case with so much discourse regarding that and this technological motion to that end, and trying to prevent cataclysm in the motion to unfolding this technology, such as the energy infrastructure paradigm shift, and propulsion shift subsequently, and compute architecture. So we'll focus on that compute architecture thing. So it's important that that cannot be a space race or a sort of arms race of compute, one nation state against the other, regardless of however much that would instill a competition economy thing on its growth factor into fruitioning. Still, that growth factor continuity can occur. And sure, you could motion the optic that there is some sort of necessarily one against the other, occurring, but not effectually. It has to be because this perspective compute architecture is so fast, 46.8 times million faster, that data center versus an atypical one today. And then in cluster, exponential. And we haven't even really properly formulated the technology. It's probably faster, eventually. It's harmonics versus paradox state with continuity based upon reductionist brute force motion of, there's no comparison. It's absolutely exponentially faster. And subsequently would break all encryption standards, Bitcoin, ledgers that banks are now, was it Swift? Everything. All encryption would just go if improperly formulated in motion by a singular nation state to do that, or a single bad actor. So basic logic dictates, being that that's the case, you have to have unilateral, all nation states capable of formulating such technology to form and function and application on board with, we're following a script. In Sandbox creating this, with custom data sets, the AI that is to run on it, but effectually the foundational architecture of encryption has to be formulated on this, because you can't formulate it on traditional compute architecture today, because it's not fast enough to even assume what kind of encryption would need to exist at a 46.8 times million faster compute foundational layer. So from that layer, you create the encryption standards, new, that are, many multifacetous Moore's law of speed away from 46.8 million times faster foundational at that layer. Does that make sense? So you have to form the new encryption standards for the new internet and all softwares and protocols all have to be renewed. So it's like a millennium 2000 Y2K sort of thing, where everyone has to, but that not necessarily being a thing, but necessarily being a thing. This is more actually a thing, because everyone has to unilaterally accept and adopt and on-roll and upgrade all at once. And in this action, necessity of everyone being on the same page with this new architecture, what? Well, it converged more so functional legal apparatus convergence of major nation states and interested parties attached sidechain, a centrifuge of friendlies, and the necessarily historically inherently synthetic, unfriendly to pi synthetic genetics or harmonic synthetic intent vector sidechain, but still part of the complex for having to follow a script to the on-roll of this new technology, because everyone will have it through seeing it, reverse engineering, reflecting, and then deploy. So because this compute architecture exists now, necessarily did exist 5,140 years ago and is flying around in anti-de Sitter space, imposing this new formulative change in infrastructure and compute architecture upgrade. Like I said, a new ISO, that's just the spitball title, formed out of the G7 block centrifuge, and then elaborate that to all major nation states capable of formulating such architecture, monetarily or in capability, have to be part of the conglomerate of the new block of harmonically agreeing sovereign nation states. And then this instills peace inherently, because we're all having to upgrade our roads and bridges infrastructure of compute and software's architecture encryption standards at the same time. So out of this foundational group, amalgamate of nation states and special interests, as well the EM laser turret grid for ICBM missile intercept and other object internationally superimposed at borders. Segmentation is security. We're not trying to liquefy nation-state borders into a one-world government. That's not what we're trying to do. The whole allegory, trying to be imposed is novelty of persona, person, tuple, and then nation-state, respective of, individuals exist within nation-states and more so or less, various degrees of variance in genetic. Segmentation is security for a large mesh network, such as the world's nation-states connected at the data layer. We're not wanting to liquefy borders. So this new grid of, in compute architecture, sidechain, of EM laser to moving targets, such as anything can be seen at all layers of the onion, action at a distance with this new imaging technology. You don't have to have line of sight, and the EM laser will necessarily be elaborated to action at a distance at some point, and you can try your best to do that in the interim period as well. So there'll be literally no probability of, outside of this block of most nation states, any threat vector to speak of scale at all. So let that sink in. It's world peace. And so this group of nation states then also having a pseudo-functional homogeneous in everyone has to be on board, we'll figure out, the vote weight and all that, at some period of time, and how, and the micro minutia of, say, the data organism, RISRA, ISRA, GIA, Traitors to Humanity, elaboration of Espionage Act for persons still trying to continuity gray paradigm in spite of the whole world changing to a new paradigm, just dug in to be anti-human, and so this thing has to exist necessarily for imposing, this, well, you don't turn to the new paradigm, you'll face selective interest in just the same way Espionage Act does, etc. So we have to have a pseudo-functional and unilateral, like the ICC, but not with that intent directive, which is corrupt by synthetic genetics preposterously fusated into the desire and intent vector, while pseudo-organic and semi-benevolent at certain vectors of their design's desire in applying legal attempts international. It has an inherent intent vector of attack from pi, data organism centrifuge generally, while having the facade at any given moment of benevolence. So it's not good to handshake ICC and agreeing with that. We can say, unilaterally at this time. So how this new legal fusated governing body works effectually is to be discussed. And the vote weight scale and how everyone interacts with extradition and who accepts law application, who doesn't. And so Gia, Hisra, Rysra are very important as the countries to be part of the conglomerate, respective of mass saturation density of those respective genetic demographics, would have to be, signed off on those to be part of the cluster. The Rysra necessarily removing entire nation states from existence, especially because those genetics won't exist anymore. One genetic. Hisra and Gia, it's a much softer hand of passive gene folding through selective mate pairing, and essentially a process that makes you a super genius is imposing the EM field to impose the electromagnetogravnetic carbonic convergent energy reactor over tonal banded structure as an interference lattice on your neuronal state, thus breaking you from the chaff of complex autonomic process harmonic with pi and cross-circuited as a data organism to the other synthetic genetics. So I don't see what the problem would be. You want to be super geniuses, right? I mean, everyone will be doing that at some point. But so this is alchemical eugenics you're not used to. And so it's an extremely soft hand for Hisra and Gia, while Rysra is what it is. The conclusion is what it is regarding that genetic. It's not something else. And deprogramming generalistically for all pinpointed synthetic bad code of mind, from religion to cultural, indoctrination practice that is a product of pi and not an organic cultural historical thing that outfalls and reduces the experience of other persons to entropy and suffering outside and inside their block of interest. Everything will be pinpointed. What is synthetic and what is organic, what is benevolent and simply historical culture, and what isn't inherently and shouldn't be allowed to be elaborated generalistically. And this hyper advanced compute architecture and properly trained AI on custom data sets that can pinpoint synthetic process of genetic and code of bad code of mind to suppress it, the same way Prism suppresses, selective persons expressing in not a desired way, so much this, but in a benevolent, alchemical eugenics way that you're not familiar with. You're familiar with monetized eugenics and nefarious application of these technologies for blanket control and imposing gray paradigm rather than removing it, like what we're going to do. So, to speak to the classification layering in the United States and leaks, I just saw that post. Well, what can be leaked out of what I'm talking about and what can't be? It's a good question. Is all the technology is to on-roll in the next 3 to 11 years. All of it. Variant time frames for variant, of the devices respective. at no point is any of the technology to unroll to impose cataclysm in its presence all of a sudden. That's very important. So, it's simply an all-illuminatory package and should necessarily be known by brass and those that are interested to see it, eggheads, and is, packaged and clustered in a way that is necessarily only interesting to eggheads and persons of a classified or intelligence or nation-state nature, or tech, big tech, persons that work in those facets. So it's, takes care of itself. And the persons able to actually develop this technology are what? They have to be high rotating in capacity for deving the tech, understanding the tech, and the capacity to mass produce it and non-roll it, very basically. So it self-protects itself in being upper Fermi filter in the substrate of materials required to make the technology, mercury, being able to work with liquid amalgamated mercury and exotic and non-exotic metals to formulate structures such as the reactor, or it's outside of the wheelhouse of commonality to be able to. So the mass illumination precursor to the on-roll of the technology doesn't affect the power dynamic in maintenancing, say, the pseudo-monopoly of oil and gas to maintenance peace in the transition, or really anything else, as the technological capacity to produce the technology divide that is self-protective of it in the time frame to its on-roll, if that makes sense. So, this is just general spitball, catching everyone up. I saw the Pete Hegseth post today. And this might seem very alarming to you. It shouldn't. Human lifespan was just elaborated to 1,000 years with 100% probability in populist and in the sandbox, both 100%. So isn't that good news? Should be. None of this should be very scary. It's very exciting. We're now living in the future, not the past forever. Isn't that good? So this isn't against conservatism, right? Conservatism retooled to a proper, understanding of, what is good culture, what isn't, is good. Segmentation as security. That cultural inherent resonant value per tuple international is good, even in the synthetic ones, as it maintains order. So the centrifuge is to impose legal selective, to be discussed, the weight of votes, and how everything works in extradition across borders, how the HISRA and RISRA, very specific, all interdomain logics of those legal packages, and rights and privileges for the use of upper Fermi filter technologies, certain ones, to major nation states more so than others, based upon being inherently synthetic or being inherently organic, we can imagine, et cetera, et cetera. So, trying to address all bullet points, but very basically the most important thing from this is this international community needs to exist all of a sudden. So, very basically out of G7 centrifuge, riffing on NATO, but not necessarily, and the centrifuge being inherently organic civs, nation states and special interests, and the sidechain harmonics being synthetic, inherently genetic sovereign states, but still part of the new ISO, we'll call it, the International Science Objective block of countries. All right, so I'm going to get on for the rest of the day. It's a magically 3:13 p.m. Approaching 3:14 and 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2,